very long days. We have welcomed these discussions held in Council and the conclusions. It's good that we reached an agreement so that we can start discussions between the institutions. We can discuss the instruments that have been confirmed above all and the ones proposed. We have always said that as regards the recovery plan, we should not reduce that threshold of 750 billion, and that is one result that we think is extremely important. We like meetings where heads of state and government discuss. They struggle and they fight to find a compromise. That's really the spirit of democracy. It's good that the presidents, the prime ministers, the heads of state did not just come with prefabricated conclusions. They came and they discussed, and this made it very clear the terms of the different proposals. Democracy is all about striving for compromise, and here in Parliament we're very used to that. We are very pleased by the vision that has been confirmed by Council. That's a shared response. Just 2 or 3 months ago, some of the issues that have been taken for granted weren't to be taken for granted at all. You'll remember that. In March, we talked about bonds, we talked about shared debt. All of that sounded like taboo, but they're no longer taboo today. And that's very important for us. Not only does it strengthen the community dimension, at the same time it also boosts the capacities of a Europe that must walk this path together. So we are satisfied with the decisions and the resources that have been put on the table, and the need for Parliament to be involved in the governance of the Recovery Fund. As regards own resources, we look with interest and with satisfaction at this commitment to quickly introduce new own resources and the increase in the ceiling of current existing own resources. This is a very interesting, useful step, and it does go in the same direction as the indications made by Parliament. Here again we would like a specific, precise timetable again for introducing at least 2 own resources in 2021, and then the others planned for later on in the process. The third issue is the MFF. We would like negotiations to be opened with Parliament. There is a proposal on the table, but we would like to improve that. We want to improve it above all by trying to give answers to some of the cuts that we deem unjustified. If we want to bet on future generations, we cannot cut the budget for research and young people and Erasmus. We can't. Well, as the German presidency has done quite rightly, if we think it's necessary to clarify migration and asylum policy, then we can't cut funds in that area. We need to start negotiations so that we can discuss this and reach a MFF that's more useful for countries and citizens. And above all, we need to support in the medium and long term the EU's objectives. As you know, yesterday I met and exchanged views with President von der Leyen. President von der Leyen and President Michel will come tomorrow to our plenary in Parliament for the discussion on the conclusions from the Council, and I'd like to thank them for accepting that invitation. With President von der Leyen, we agreed on the need to focus on 3 issues. 1, governance of the recovery, own resources, and the MFF. Negotiations between institutions need the Parliament to be involved as well. I think the application of Article 324 of the treaties, the periodic meeting between parliaments of the presidents of the Parliament, the rotating Council President and the Commission President, I think that's something that we agree on, and of course that allows us to have an in-depth discussion on the MFF proposal. So that's the picture coming from Parliament. You know that tomorrow the politicians will put forward a resolution that goes in that direction. Today we've just had a discussion at the Conference of Presidents which confirmed this. A broad majority there supported those indications. And so now if you have any questions, then I'm very happy to answer them. Okay, so we'll start with the questions. Leonardo.
Buongiorno, Presidente.
Good morning from Mediaset. I'd like to know what this voting entails here in Parliament. What points from the European Council proposal would you like to improve? Well, let me say it again. We would like an association with delegated acts of the European Parliament. We want to be involved in the governance of the democratic process and the community method of the recovery. On own resources, we want a very quick proposal. We've already appointed our rapporteurs. I think the Commission needs to start discussions with them to put their proposal before Parliament as soon as possible. We'll be ready even as soon as September to examine that proposal and assess it. Then, as you know, the MFF, well, we want to really go into the substance of some of the cuts that have been proposed. We think that some of those cuts do need to be corrected. As you know, on the MFF, we are the budgetary authority. We're going to have the last word, so we would like this process to allow us to overcome the objections that we have, particularly as regards the cuts, because they will simply make it not possible for the EU to reach the objectives that it has set itself. That's the Green Deal, matters relating to resilience. If there's less research, how are we going to be more resilient? Those are research funds, as I said before, funds to help us tackle the great challenges faced by the modern world. If we want to have a common policy on migration and asylum, as the German presidency has said, how can we cut funds for migration? I think that would make our response weaker. And so there are a number of points that the Parliament does wish to make in a constructive spirit to try and correct some of the mistakes that we think there still are in the proposed MFF.
We'll
take a first question from the Skype journalist. Thank you very much. Thank you, President. I'm from Radio Española. How long do you think it will take to get an agreement, do you think?
We've seen these 5 days. Do you think Parliament will actually manage to change anything at all?
Vinto.
The President. Well, if I didn't think it was possible, then I wouldn't say it was necessary to change things. I am convinced that we will have a positive response. I am confident of that. I trust the European institutions. And I trust that Parliament will be able to motivate the need and explain the need for certain changes. Once again, as regards the recovery, we're very satisfied. There's satisfaction in Parliament, in all the groups, and you'll see that tomorrow at the resolution that's going to be presented. As regards the multi-annual budget, well, there's some work to be done. Negotiations need to be started. And I think some of the points can be changed in the interest of everyone. We're working for everyone's good and interest here. We're not alone. It's for all of the institutions. We're within a mechanism whereby Parliament represents citizens, and we recognise the competences and importance of the other institutions too. So I think this spirit benefits everyone. It allows us all to grow, and it will allow the European Union not just it will allow us to leave this crisis stronger than before. Important steps have already been made. As I was saying before, just think of the debates we were having in March on the shared response, on shared debt. All of that seemed like taboo. But we held strong with a vision for the European Union. And I think this is recognised by the other institutions. The Parliament, as an institution, in May, it made a difference. And that has been recognised by everyone. We are working in everyone's interest. Thank you.
Any questions in the room?
Buongiorno. I will ask my question in Italian as translation is provided. Presidente, solamente.
Mr. President, I just have one question, if I may. On the governance of the recovery, the governance for national plans is already rather complicated. So I'd like to understand, what role would Parliament aim to have here? Does it want to have a direct say on how national plans are approved? Well, we respect the competences. We're happy that after a very, very long discussion on the mechanism to be adopted, that Council did respect the institution's prerogatives, and in particular the Commission's competences. Those seem to have been put in the background to some extent, but that role has been reasserted. Now, as regards the reviews, we don't wish to go into detail in examining national plans. That's up to other institutions. But the general positioning between national plans and European policies, well, here, Parliament must be listened to. We want to count on the objectives of resilience and the Green Deal. And so that is our task. We must represent the voices of citizens as regards the positioning in order to achieve those objectives. And here, Parliament's position is very important, and I do believe it will be listened to.
There is a question now from Marko Nemet from Slovakia. Please, Marko.
I would like to ask Mr. President if the Parliament will tomorrow agree the EU recovery budget, or there will be some troubles. Thanks.
No, domani noi abbiamo una plenaria.
Tomorrow we have an extraordinary plenary session to say what Parliament's position is on the conclusions of the European Council. We know that from the recovery onwards, the procedure will require clarifying the different instruments that have been set up. On own resources, we're ready straight away to take a look at the Commission's proposal, but we do need to receive that proposal. I told President von der Leyen yesterday that we would be ready from September to work on this, and it's now up to the Commission to send us that proposal. As regards recovery and the MFF, well, again, we're part of a process here, and we'll start clarifying our positions and trying to reach solutions here. You know that the final vote on the MFF will not happen tomorrow. It will come in a couple of months' time. We have to have the negotiations first. We need to look at the different budget lines and see where there needs to be in-depth analysis, where details need to be clarified. The work on the EU's budget, as you all know, is always a very detailed, in-depth piece of work. And it's also difficult in some ways to come up with a final proposal.
Beatriz Ríos from Euractiv, please.
Hello. Can you hear me? Okay. So I'm sorry to follow up on what my colleagues asked, but first of all, I wonder if you discussed with President Charles Michel how is this dialogue going to take place? How is the Parliament going to negotiate all those changes that you would like to see in the proposal? When is that going to happen? Because we've seen a 5-day council, and it seems difficult to see how we can proceed very quickly to make sure that there is an agreement soon and that the Parliament can vote. And if that doesn't happen, is the Parliament ready to vote down the proposal of the Council?
Well, I think I've already said this quite clearly. As regards to the budget, what I heard from President von der Leyen was that there is an intention to reflect on Article 324 and applying that. That would mean negotiations between the institutions, between the Parliament, the Commission, and not the Council, but the rotating presidency. And this negotiation will go into the details of the MFF, and we'll put forward our proposals. Above all, we're going to put forward this need, as we see it, to make certain corrections, and I think all citizens are expecting those to be made. But here we're talking about the MFF budget. As regards recovery and own resources, well, I think I was very clear there. I've seen a degree of surprise among journalists that the heads of state and government spent 5 days with their discussions. I don't really understand that surprise. We wouldn't want the leaders of our 27 countries to arrive at meetings knowing exactly what the result would be. There needs to be debate, discussions. The interests of all parties need to be talked about. And I think that is a very useful spirit. I think it helps to build Europe. If they had to spend another 5 days having meetings, I would have been happy. I wouldn't have been displeased by that. That's the democratic process. You reach shared joint conclusions. If I can add one observation of my own and on behalf of Parliament, because I discussed this with the other presidents. What we've understood from and learnt from the COVID experience and the experience of the last council, that we do need some changes in the institutional system in Europe. We need that. We need that so that we don't halt democratic processes, so that we can overcome this idea that everything must be resolved by unanimity and a veto could halt democracy. I do think this is a observation that many people are making. And so this morning we had a very intense discussion about the need to give life to one of the commitments of this parliamentary term, which is the conference on the future of Europe. Parliament is ready. It's now up to the other institutions to really launch the start of this major reflection on Europe. You know that Parliament has already adopted 2 resolutions on this. It's my commitment, it's a commitment of all political groups to get this process started as soon as possible. Today at the Conference of Presidents, that was reiterated. So this shouldn't just be a conference about talking about ourselves. It needs to be a conference where we can understand how we can tackle the future in a better way, how we can be more effective. And I think that's very useful. The lessons we're learning from COVID and the decision-making dynamics in the institutions, they all need to be clarified. Thank you.
Any questions from the room? Yes, you first, and then you, madam.
Bonjour, Monsieur le Président.
Good morning, President, and thank you. The question was going to be about your relationship with Charles Michel, but you've already answered that. On Africa, though, let me take an example. Ivory Coast, the Prime Minister has died. They're looking at elections for October, and like other African countries, they're relying on this EU-Africa aid. Have you looked at that kind of case? During your debates, your high-level political debates, have you looked at that? I mean, this whole country is suffering. So what is your reaction to the death of the Prime Minister of Ivory Coast, and what are you going to do to not forget Africa?
Well, I can take what you're saying simply to reiterate the need to strengthen the EU's role at international level, and our capacities for dialogue and a strong presence on the African continent. I think this is a discussion that will also have to be had within the context of the budget. If we were to have a lower amount of resources, then our capacities will be reduced. You referenced objectives, and those are strategic objectives. We need to be able to be a interlocutor with a continent that to us is not just important, but we understand how much interconnection there is between us and the African continent. Our destinies are intertwined between Europe and Africa, and these destinies do need to be supported through a stronger political action and concentration, and all of this does need a political machine that has sufficient resources behind it.
Mr. President, there was a significant watering down of the rule of law in the conclusion of the Council. I would like to know what the European Parliament intends to do with the respect on this. Thank you.
Noi vogliamo riproporre.
We would like to repropose that matter. We've understood that this issue is shared, but the instruments still need to be clarified. And in the Council's conclusions, there are some indications, but there are no real lines for intervention. So this is remaining in some ways in the background, but it's a topic that the Parliament cares about a lot. We're pleased that this issue has been reproposed to Council, but today we need to see exactly what intervention measures are to be used to support this. We can't support a reduction in our expectations for shared values. That's really the point we're at. As has been said by all group presidents today, a vast majority, want to play an important role in defining specific interventions. We think this is an open issue. We want to participate here. We will not be satisfied with just mentions of principle. Okay, I see there are still some questions on Skype. We'll take Filippo Giuffrido and then Angela Mauro from the Huffington Post.
Grazie. Buongiorno, Presidente.
Thank you. Good morning. Well, these have been 5 intense days in Council, that's what you said, and fortunately for our colleagues, it didn't last 5 extra days. Now, you gave us a list of points that Parliament is going to consider in negotiations: young people, Erasmus+, research, Horizon, migration, and there's the Just Transition Fund that's been cut almost by a third. Is that also going to be part of your negotiations? Taking into account Parliament's prerogatives, could you possibly conceive of actually blocking this?
Determinati a far rispettare.
Well, we are determined that Parliament, as the budgetary authority, is respected. We've said this for a long time, and you know this well. No political group wants to give up their prerogatives, and that's being the budget authority. You put some other points on the list that I put forward, but we could add others too. As regards the transition, well, this is a strategic theme. If we don't help some countries in a more significant way to try and find a balance, then how are we to meet the challenges of the Green Deal? How will we meet the objectives of the Green Deal? And so in the budget lines, among our priorities will be the green transition too. It's a very important issue at the moment. It has an impact on many national standards, and we hear this desire. Just as happened with COVID, we wish to support those countries that are facing the greatest difficulties. And that's really the story we're learning from COVID. It's an opportunity to relaunch other priorities. We don't have 27 countries with equal standards on emissions for various reasons, for various historical reasons. Each country has dealt with them differently. Now, with the lessons from COVID, we feel that those countries that are struggling most as regards emissions, well, there needs to be a shared response. It's in the interest of all at 27 to support these countries. That is the new spirit that we are drawing from this, and we want to reinforce that spirit.
Ho incontrato Jeremy.
When I met Jeremy Rifkin, well, it was very encouraging. He said that right now, on the environmental transition, only Europe can really claim to be a global leader. Others have lost the moral authority there. And I think that for Parliament, for the Commission, for Council, well, that's really the challenge for our recovery, for the recovery of our economies and the vision we have of the future. And we are really going to give it our all.
Lo prego.
Sì, mi sentite?
Yes, can you hear me? We hear you very well. Good morning, everyone. Mr. President, you mentioned the cuts to research, Erasmus, immigration, asylum, And you called for negotiations on the MFF budget. I'd like to know why you think this happened. The European Council decided to cut these very important, crucial points. So who do you think is responsible for that? Is it a matter of national interest? We heard about this split between North and South, that there would be, particularly the Netherlands, calling for greater cuts in the budget. So how do you think you're going to interact to correct these changes? Now, we've also seen the introduction of 2 own resources by next year. I think one will probably be plastic. And what is the other one? Thank you. Well, the other one is the one we've already mentioned. It's the ETS. That could be useful right now to increase resources to support the debt that we are going to be incurring. It could also then be useful here to have more shared standards, and that's a very important point. As regards the conclusions from the Council, there's one thing I'd like to say. Clearly, from the Parliament's point of view, we followed those discussions day and night. We followed as it unfolded. And at one point we were very concerned that they might not reach an agreement. We've always supported the need for an agreement. That's what's put on the table in the discussions that will be held with Parliament. And so having a conclusion of that from that council was very important. At one point we feared this might not be possible, that discussions might be called off, that it might be postponed for months to come. But we did see that an effort was being made to try and reduce the distances between positions. That's extremely important, and basically the agreement that was reached was one based on unanimity, and it does reduce the distances. There were very many claims put forward, many sensitive points, many different legitimate interests that were all on the table during these discussions. And we recognise that the agreement reached in Council is an important one. And now, as I said before, we would like to have some discussions. We want to try and improve some of the instruments. Yesterday, as all 27 heads of state and government, we welcomed the result. We were pleased with it, with the result that had been achieved. We know that particularly as regards the multi-annual financial framework, there is still work to be done. But you have all been witnesses to what I've said in previous months. You were all there. And I've always said that on the budget, the Council doesn't have the last word. On the rest of it, then there are prerogatives that we respect. We want to be involved and try to strengthen the community spirit of the response to this emergency. And so that's the situation we find ourselves in. And I think this is the spirit which we need to have with us from the recovery, from governance, for own resources, and right up to the definition and the needs of all states that will be taken into account over the next 7 years. And we hope that there will be a positive result there.
And the very last question.
I'd like to ask your opinion. It's been said that two different ideas really collided at the European Council. So what do you think about this?
Io credo che alla fine
Well, I think that in the end, the most precious thing prevailed, which we should always bear in mind. Maybe we pay less attention to it, but it's community law. With regard to some curiosities, this has really clarified the competences of our institutions. And so some of those different curiosities weren't able to manifest themselves. And so I think that's what came out of the discussions at a certain point. Clearly, we do need to have solutions within the framework of the different institutions' competences. And I think the result that we achieved reiterated and reasserted that. There were perhaps attempts to give Council new competences or perhaps sideline the Commission. So I think this was a very good exercise. We never really think about how important the prerogatives are that are established in the treaties for the different institutions. We think that's something we can take for granted. And yet, throughout this process, we've seen how important it really is. We see that in the decisions made by the individual countries when the reference to community law and this extraordinary strength of the law and how important that is. I think in the Council's conclusions we also see that reflected.
Grazie. E viva.
Thank you very much, and have great holidays if we don't see each other again. You deserve a great holiday. Thank you.
Allora, mo fai una